Today, we're going to be looking at Frances Teresa Stuart. Frances is best known for famously refusing to become the mistress of Charles II. But what else do we know of her? Frances was born on the 8th of July 1647, when her parents, Walter Stuart, a royal physician and distant relative of the royal family, and Sophia were exiled in Paris. Frances grew up in the household of Henrietta Maria, who was, of course, the widow of the executed King Charles I. Walter and Sophia had taken refuge here in 1649, and it seems that the Queen Mother was very fond of Frances as a youngster. Frances would move to rainier climes before long though, and in around 1662 to 1663, at the age of about 15 or 16, she was sent to England to serve at the royal court. By this point, the English monarchy had of course been restored, and Frances had a position in the household of the wife of King Charles II, Catherine of Braganza, as a lady-in-waiting, though she clearly made quite an impression on the king himself. Frances was renowned for her beauty and attracted a lot of attention. When the Duchess of York commissioned Peter Lely to paint 11 Windsor beauties, Frances was included and painted in the guise of Diana, goddess of the hunt, as seen here. When Grand Duke Cosimo III of Tuscany visited England, he was one of many men who begged for his own portrait miniature of Frances. She was becoming quite the celebrity at court. Whilst famous diarist Samuel Pepys remarked that she was the greatest beauty he had ever seen, with her, quote, sweet eye, little Roman nose, and excellent figure, end quote, the Count of Gramont tempered such praise with criticism of her wit, stating that, quote, it would be difficult to imagine less brain combined with more beauty, end quote. This harsh and perhaps unjustified view, considering Frances's later success in estate management, was not enough to stop the men of the court from pursuing her. Her most famous admirer was the king himself, and he became almost immediately obsessed with her. But surprisingly, perhaps, she staunchly refused to become his mistress. When the Queen's wife Catherine lay gravely ill in October 1663, it was reported that although the king was distraught, he may also have been lining Frances up to be his next wife. But this was not to be. Catherine survived, and although Charles did approach the Archbishop of Canterbury to discuss the possibility of divorcing Catherine for her barrenness and their lack of children, this never came to be. The likes of the Duke of Buckingham and the son of the Earl of Bristol, Francis Digby, both sought out Frances, and Buckingham was also a key player in trying to get Frances to succumb to the desires of the king, much to the chagrin of the king's longer-term mistress, Barbara Villiers, Lady Castlemaine. Though Pepys reported that Frances and the king were seen kissing in corridors, it seems that this is as far as their physical relationship went. A frustrated Charles was later heard to remark that he looked forward to the day that Frances was, quote, old and willing. As it turned out, Frances was interested in none of these men, and whilst she was involved with a man named Charles Stuart, it was not the king, but rather Charles Stuart, 3rd Earl of Richmond, 6th Duke of Lennox. He was, in fact, though, a 4th cousin to Charles II. And it does seem that there was, in fact, some deal of passion and affection between Frances and this Charles. Lady Castlemaine, hearing of the attachment and sensing an opportunity to spoil the king's affection for Frances, bribed William Chiffinch, keeper of the king's closet, into leading her and the king to a room in which the young couple were having a clandestine meeting. The pair were found in a compromising position, and though the king was enraged, Frances actually stood up to him. She remarked that Richmond could offer her an honourable marriage, which he definitely could not. The king later gave his grudging blessing to the union, but really he refused to give up on his infatuation of Frances. He attempted to expose Richmond as financially insolvent, though this failed because he was financially solvent, and had also offered Frances the position of maîtresse en titre and a title of Duchess in her own right, which would elevate her above the status of Lady Castlemaine. Despite this, Frances continued to refuse, and actually, she also returned all her gifts of jewellery that the king had given her. By this point too, Frances was understandably becoming increasingly afraid of the king's obsession, and one night in March 1667 she slipped out of her rooms at Whitehall to meet Richmond at an inn by London Bridge. As soon as dawn broke, the couple rode to Richmond's estate at Cobham and were married. This did not please the king, But after suffering a bout of smallpox in 1669, Frances was reconciled with him. He was very concerned for her, and after a while, she and her husband were welcomed back to court, though the king did send Richmond abroad on several diplomatic missions. He was sent first to Scotland and then to Denmark, where he died in 1672. Frances had only been married for around 5 years before she was widowed. The couple had had no children, and Frances would never marry again. Frances continued as a favoured courtier for the remainder of her life. She witnessed the birth of James II, also known as the Old Pretender, in 1688, and she also attended the coronation of Queen Anne in 1702. Frances died later that same year in October. She was around 55 years of age. She leaves a clear legacy in being featured in the Windsor Gallery of Beauties, as well as on a Medal of Britannia which was commissioned by Charles II in 1667. According to Pepys, Frances was the model for the face of Britannia. If you're interested, there is also a wax effigy of Frances held in Westminster Abbey, along with her stuffed pet parrot. This was commissioned as part of a memorial. I hope you've enjoyed learning about Frances as much as I enjoyed researching her. If you enjoyed this video, please do check out my other videos on my channel and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.